All right, everyone, so I am showing a couple of minutes past the hour, so let's go ahead and dive in. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Please note that this session will be recorded, and we want to keep this session as interactive as possible. So if you do have any questions, please drop them in the question and answer box, and we'll get to them as soon as the presentations conclude or in the middle. We just want to make sure that this is interactive. So let's go ahead and get started. So we do have a big agenda for you today, jam-packed full of lots of insights and lots of exciting speakers. So we're going to start out with an introduction from Sarum, who is our CEO and co-founder of SharpCloud. Then we're going to jump into the productivity puzzle by Phil Smith. And then we're going to go into how to think strategically and road mapping development in manufacturing. And then we're going to wrap it all up with one of our SharpCloud shining stars, Duncan Evans, who's going to take us through one of the newest functionality so that you can really start understanding kind of what your technology strategy should be. So let's go ahead and dive in to Sarum. Take it away.
Thank you, Liza. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarum, one of the co-founders here at SharpCloud, and really just wanted to do a couple of minutes before the talks. I'm really excited to hear the talks today from Phil and Gregorio. I guess from my perspective, what I wanted to do is just open with a few words on the kind of companies we're working with and the kind of problems we've helped them to solve. We have a pretty rich history with manufacturing companies. I've actually spent some time with some of these companies myself. And, you know, if I ask myself the question, well, why SharpCloud for these companies? I guess I would say when we started the business, we could see that there were many other tools in the sort of near spaces to us, particularly project management tools or business intelligence tools or reporting and dashboarding tools. And quite often we could see that project-led companies would be trying to use those tools to manage strategic road mapping or to think about strategic road mapping or to think about their portfolios, but they would often struggle to get the complexity all into a place where they could make decisions. So to go back to the why SharpCloud, with many of these companies, why SharpCloud? Because they had tried to solve these problems with other tools from their tool set for projects or business intelligence or reporting, and they had no way of really stitching together some data with some of the content in the business and the relationships that they wanted to see across those complex portfolios. So I would say, in a nutshell, being able to pull together the data, the content and the relationships, and then allowing your audiences to see multiple lenses on that is the real why for SharpCloud for lots of these companies. So that's really what I wanted to say right at the top of this call. And I would say if I was looking at what benefit those organizations got from the ones that I specifically worked with, I could definitely see that they collaborated much better inside the organization and outside using SharpCloud. You know, a good example of that would be some of the membership-led organizations like the Catapults in the UK and the Aerospace Technology Institute, where they created collaborative roadmaps that their members could actually participate in and help them to improve. They also used the SharpCloud stories for setting stakeholder expectations or better stakeholder expectations by actually having a visual representation of what the future was. And ultimately, in many cases, they were making better decisions. So that's all I wanted to do, a couple of minutes about why SharpCloud, the kind of companies we've worked with. I guess before we jump in and talk, what I thought might be also quite good would be if anybody has any kind of ideas for or pre-ideas for what they would like to see as outcomes from this meeting, please do share them in the chat now so we can think about those, and we'll come back to those, to your questions and potentially the outcomes that you're thinking SharpCloud could deliver to you in the closing session, which I'd like to do with the team. So do feel free now, maybe just take a few moments, any kind of thoughts you have about what SharpCloud is today, potentially how it could help you, or what you thought were your expectations for the session today. Do share them with us and we'll come back to those. Okay, Liza.
Sounds great. Thank you, Sarah. We really appreciate the quick introduction. So let's go ahead and move on to our second speaker. His name is Phil Smith, and he's a former chief executive and chairman of Cisco UK and Ireland. This is where he really understood that his passion was about innovation, skills, technology, digitization, and that he currently takes into his role of chairing all of these organizations that you can see on this screen, a lot of acronyms. And so where he has worked in advanced material solutions, working in payments, and then also smart mobility. Just the icing on the cake, though, Phil was actually awarded a CBE by one of the highest Queen's honors for his service in technology, business, and skills. So those of you that are from America are not really familiar with what that is. It's one of the highest honors in the UK from the Queen. So exciting. Congratulations, Phil. And we look forward to him jumping into the productivity puzzle. Take it away, Phil.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. And thank you, Sharon, for the introduction as well. And it's great to be here today and to share maybe a little bit of a different perspective with you on productivity. And the reason I'm talking about this today is because one, to sort of slightly open your perspective a little as you then dive down into what SharpCloud can do for you, how it works in the manufacturing sector particularly, and can help you to kind of see the wood for the trees. Because part of the challenge we have in productivity is it's so important. Now, many of you are probably sitting out there saying, well, what does productivity really mean to me? I'm productive, my organization's productive, my country's productive. But actually it is important. And, I wanted to make sure that I gave you a little bit of a sense of that today, and maybe some of the key levers that improve productivity, what those could mean to you, to your customers, to your partners, and maybe even to your country, your organization. So the productivity puzzle, it's called a puzzle because people are really scratching their head about what really makes productivity effective. But if you look at sort of famous quotation from Paul Krugman, who is an economist, he said, productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it is almost everything. And the reason that's the case is that actually a country's ability to improve its standard of living, so not just the output per individual or the effectiveness of an organization, but actually your living standards and what you do on a day-to-day basis is based on your productivity. And, I'm going to frame a lot of this in the context of the UK and maybe even the small businesses in the UK, but this is applicable right across the piece. But the UK has a particular challenge, and I think it helps us to illustrate where the challenge of productivity is and what it can do to improve our lifestyle and our competitiveness as organizations. So, it's important. One of the things you hear quoted a lot in the UK is that the German worker creates the same output in 4 days as a British worker does in 5, which is a pretty damning indictment. But it's actually true of the productivity challenge in the UK, which is we don't produce the same level of output as many of our peers. Now, this isn't something that's been around for ages, and you don't need to look at the detail of this graph, but if you follow the kind of black line and the sort of blue that disappears off to the right there, what this essentially said is that for many years, productivity was broadly improving in the UK. Technology, many other things were improving that capability. But actually, since the financial crisis, these successive yellow lines and the red line, which were forecasts of productivity, have decreased and decreased. And in fact, the UK's productivity has broadly flatlined. And that's really concerning because it means that the UK is now around 17% less productive than its G7 peers. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody else is perfect, because many other countries have suffered productivity challenges as well. But it does mean that, that if you're looking at a world of post-Brexit, post-COVID, or hopefully post-COVID at some point, huge macroeconomic changes going on, productivity becomes more and more important in your competitiveness as a nation, as an individual company, and obviously as an economy. So now, what does this mean? Well, productivity, as you can see, it doesn't mean working harder. I'm sure a lot of you think you work harder than most, and certainly in the UK, there's a great work ethic over here, and people do work very hard. So this is not about saying you need to go and do more. It's actually about being smarter about the way you work. But the challenge with productivity is we do have a big issue of denial. Most people deny that their productivity is less. In fact, if you ask most people whether they are, as most companies, whether they're as productive or more productive than their peers, around 90% will say, yeah, we're as productive or more productive. The real answer, if you look at the stats underneath, is less than 40%. So in fact, 75% of people who work for UK companies are working below the average productivity. So they work for companies which are below the average. You know, again, that's slightly worrying if you work in a company. And again, this is it's a worse statistic for the UK, but it's also challenging for a number of other economies as well. So this issue of, I think I'm really productive, I don't really need to change, is actually an important one. And we need to recognize that that denial is something we need to get over, and we need to address some of the root causes. Because actually the prize is huge. If you could improve the UK's productivity by 10%, so I mean, you know, the company that's at the 30th percentile could move to 40th, the one who's at the 70th could move to 80th. So not getting everybody to the best, but moving everybody up by a nudge, it could be £130 billion a year of additional value add to the UK economy. That is a huge number, and particularly given, you know, the challenges we've had around COVID and the difficulties it's brought to us. That means that, you know, we really need to find a way of tapping into this, making ourselves more productive, let alone more competitive with you know, with others as well. So an important factor, it's not just something that economists care about. This affects you, it affects your company, it affects your suppliers, your partners, your supply chain. So something, you know, that all of us need to think about. So I'm not going to go into all the details. We've done a huge amount of work in this, and it really broadly comes down to two major factors which we have to balance, which is leadership and management and technology adoption. These are the big levers. If we can improve leadership and management in companies, or if we can improve the technology adoption, we will move the needle on productivity. There are other things you can do that are clearly, you know, incentives and factors in the economy, but broadly, these two are the big needle movers which will really make the change. So we have to focus on those. And I'm not going to talk huge amount about leadership and management today, although it is extremely important, but I am going to talk about technology adoption. But of course, as you will also know, those are tied together, and you'll see companies who are more adept at technology or understanding their position in technology typically have stronger leadership, and strong leadership often brings, you know, a sense of the advantages and capabilities of technology. So those are extremely important. You know, but there is a problem and an opportunity. If you look at technology, and, you know, I'm not going to go into all the details again of how this works, but there's a massive amount of data on it. Technology does drive productivity. So smaller businesses use a couple of systems, ERP, CRM, or supply chain systems, are at least 25% more productive than their peers. So there is evidence, not just of having a website or being able to do a transaction, but people who start to do some of the more difficult things around automating systems inside the organization are significantly more productive than peers. And yet the UK ranks 28th in Europe in technology adoption, which is a really stunning figure for anybody who's based in the UK. You wouldn't believe that, because we often think of the UK as a leader in e-commerce, as, you know, a great financial system and so on, and that's definitely true. We are at the front end of the business extremely adept, and we all know that, you know, because predominantly of our banking system, we're able to be extremely adept at that kind of side of it. But when it goes backwards into the trickier capabilities, you start to see where this sort of thing falls apart. And it, you know, as you travel around Europe, you start to see the differences in some of the European countries, maybe actually governed by the fact that they've had to regulate their workforce a bit more. The result is that they've had to automate more, and hence are more productive. So again, I'm not going to go into all the detail. This is really just to get you thinking about the issues of productivity. In the UK, of course, 45% of UK GDP is generated by small businesses. So if our small businesses, and those can be our businesses, up to 250 users, which is a reasonable size business, if they are less productive, or if they happen to be your partners or your supply chain or your customers, then that's important. And they also employ 60% of all the workforce in Britain as well. So, and this is not unlike most countries. So that stat is not different. So although I'll talk about SMEs a bit because we've done some specific work to try and address this, it's not a universally applicable only to SMEs. This actually plays right across the economy and across all businesses. COVID, of course, has an impact. It's had a positive impact in some ways in terms of technology usage, but it's had a negative. And so, back in 2020, when McKinsey did a lot of work with us on looking at the productivity challenge for SMEs, 1 in 3 said they'd be out of business by the end of the summer. And I think, that's probably been broadly the case, even with furlough and some of the support that was there. But businesses did respond. There's no doubt about it. I mean, the fact that we're having this webinar now is much more common than it was pre-COVID. So there has been a push which has got people to start to use technology. And, internet sales went up to about 30%, retail sales between February and May in 2020, not surprisingly. So the trick now really is how to keep the snowball rolling. If we've started to create this momentum with small businesses, how can we continue with that? Because most SMEs believe that they can improve their business with technology, but they're and often think they can reduce costs with it. Maybe again tasting some of the advantages they've seen in this time of COVID. But there are a lot more that are willing to invest in technology, but they've had a challenge with their funding. So, they may want to do it, but of course, many of them are struggling for all the obvious reasons with being able to support technology adoption. So there's definitely things we need to do to ease that and to make it, and some stuff's been done by the UK government and by a number of other governments to try and do this. But there is a good baseline, but there's significant potential to improve. Now, just to give you a bit of a hope in this journey, Be the Business, which is the business you can see in this slide here. This is the homepage of Be the Business, is a business-led organization, which I'm one of the trustees of, was founded by business leaders, the chairman of John Lewis at the time, BAE, a whole series of manufacturing, Siemens and other technology companies, as well as big retail companies and so on as well, the chairman of Rolls-Royce, various other business leaders got together and ultimately created this organization called Be the Business, which is now supported by the government, but is really there focused on ways that we could genuinely help. And you'll see even from this one screen, there's lots of resources available, there's lots of guidance available, and there's lots of capabilities available that you can hook into through this. So we're trying to find systematic ways and systemic ways of addressing this challenge, but it's going to need innovation. We're going to have to do something different. We've obviously been working at this for a few years now, but we still have the challenge. So innovation, which is something we're all very focused on, and I know the guys at SharpCloud have been, very focused on doing things differently, as Sarim identified before. We need to think differently about this problem. And technology is clearly a lever. I mean, since 2007, when the iPhone was announced, and before, of course, everything changed. Everything changed, the simplicity of the way we saw things, the ability of users to be connected at all times, the access to information, the app kind of world that we've all become familiar with. It has changed everything. And it's surprising to think it only was in 2007 the iPhone was announced, which is, 7 years after 9/11 or whatever. So this is, it seems like yesterday, but yet this has now made a huge change to the way that we do everything, not just the Apple, of course, Apple iPhone, but of course, the way we think about technology overall. And it happens in other industries. This is just as an illustration of technology's power. This is the genome research, which is a technology-driven change as well. Back in 2001, it cost $100 million to sequence a single genome. It now is approaching less than $100. So there's been a millionfold decrease in cost, or improvement in cost by use of technology. So technology can have a massive influence, not only in the obvious areas like phones and digitally oriented IT, but of course in bioscience and many other areas as well. And of course, manufacturing engineering is an area that this is hugely applicable to. But there are many barriers to tackle to improve this. And if you look at the barriers that small businesses particularly see, but this is true of bigger businesses as well, there's some understood ones. You know, things like suppliers don't necessarily understand SME business. It's difficult to adopt a solution. There's lots of upfront work to do and so on. And those are the kind of obvious things that any of you, I'm sure, would have said. But there are a bunch of other less obvious things, which I think is important that we address. And I wanted to share a few of them today. Interestingly enough, funding does not feature in the top of those. So this is not an issue of people wanting to spend money. Yes, they want the best use of money. As you see there, high prices and difficulty in getting going on things is tough, but that's not the top barrier. When you look at the barriers, you know, there's obviously things like, you know, avoiding suppliers who don't understand them, as we said, or that upfront effort, but actually it's things like people who can't translate into their own words. And I know the guys are going to talk to you later, but to me, you know, the kind of visualization and simplification that the SharpCloud guys are bringing is clearly something that tries to sort of unpick the ROI for things, because that's really what people are struggling with. They can't justify the cost of a new solution. You know, there's resistance by staff. I'll talk a bit more about this in a minute. It doesn't really integrate with other things, and they're overwhelmed by the complexity of switching. And these came out very clearly as we talked to business. We had a big survey and a huge amount of analysis work with McKinsey, primary research and secondary research. And, you know, these things came out very strongly as barriers to how it stopped people adopting technology. And if you look at those, you know, most SMEs do not see value in technology because for two primary reasons, but many others, but the two primary ones you see in here are for micro businesses is that, you know, we're happy. Well, for micro businesses, it's the middle one, which is employees, they don't really have the skills. And we'll talk a bit more about skills in a minute. But actually for bigger businesses, for smaller businesses that do less than 10 people, they're kind of happy with where they are today. Do we really need to change? You know, what's this really about? Why are you putting in the system? And we can all see that. We know, you know, smaller companies and bigger companies where this has become an issue. And then if you look at those who do adopt it, the primary barrier is the employees weren't engaged. And again, you can see this, whether it's in a small or big company, if you don't bring your organization along with you, the leader can say, yeah, I want to do this, or maybe even the IT organization say they want to do this. But if you can't bring the organization along with you, it's a huge barrier. And then the other one was that, you know, we didn't deliver the solution outcome as expected. That clearly plays strongly into what you're going to hear later on. So it really is an issue of, you know, clarity, making sure you bring an organization along with you and making sure that you understand what the benefits really are. So, you know, small and medium businesses are 3 times more likely than micro businesses to struggle to delivering the expected results. That's pretty damning, to be quite honest. And these are relatively big companies. A company of 250 people can be tens of millions of turnover, if not bigger. So, you know, this is something that's right across the piece and something we have to be conscious of. So there are a whole number of things, and again, I'm summarizing this massively just to get you thinking about it. But, you know, the things that we really need to put in place to help SMEs adopt technology are reassurance and translation, putting into their terms. If you go and tell a manufacturing company that this is all about, you know, a kind of retail front end of things, they're going to, well, that's not really applicable to me. If you talk about machine usage time, if you talk about, you know, if you talk about output, if you talk about productivity and within, you know, within the workforce, how you get them in and out and effectively use people within, say, a building environment, you start to get a different sense of things. So talking in the language which is expected by users, super important. Measuring the ROI, you know, what is it you're really trying to create? Focusing on an end user approach and really saying, this isn't simply about persuading the leader or the IT group if you have one, it's about allowing everyone to think about what we're doing. And then also, you know, ecosystem thinking, that people want to be able to tap into a marketplace that allows integration between solutions. How do you pull things together? And I think, again, you know, good story to hear from SharpCloud on that. And then migration. Again, you know, we as individual users know that if we're trying to move from, one bank to another, we hate it when it's really difficult to do. Well, that's true of users as well. They don't like the idea that they have to change everything to be able to make the difference. So, it's very important that we think about these things, not only as people who might support smaller businesses, but as larger businesses who might be providing solutions to smaller businesses. And just I'll whistle talk through a few of these, but 1 in 2 SMEs would use technology solutions if they're more friendly. This is fairly extensive data we've got here. So, user friendliness is not an insignificant thing to do. 1 in 3 SMEs don't see the value, and 50% adopt if it's recommended by the existing suppliers or clients. Now, that's good, but it's also bad. It'd be good if it was higher than that, obviously. But they do need some reassurance and translation. They need to see trusted partners and trusted companions. ROI, 2 in 3 SMEs don't measure the quantitative impact of solutions. Right, it's not surprising if you're running a small business and you've got a million other things to do, but if you can simplify and help people to understand the effectiveness of their of their business, that can be very, very powerful. And that was the number 2 reason for unsuccessful tech adoption, is that people didn't see the results. They got some new system, it was just a bit hard, or didn't really make any difference to the business. Well, if you're trying to persuade a business leader, that makes sense. They want to see what the real output is. End user approach, their SMEs are much more likely to fail if employees are resistant themselves. So again, getting employees with the right skills and capabilities is important. But we have a skills challenge. There's no doubt about it. And this is not, again, unique to the UK. This is across the piece. Within 20 years, 90% of new roles will require digital skills. So, again, many businesses say digital, what does it really mean? What does it mean to me? I'm a bit worried about it. The skill base that we have within our organizations is incredibly important. And unless we raise that, we're going to struggle to be able to adapt to people. So it's an important fact to do. In the UK and in many other sectors, it's going to take a big change because the system is very fragmented. Amazingly enough, in UK, 20% of school leavers don't have the reading skills to participate productively in society. That is shocking and a disgrace, to be quite honest. We shouldn't have that. So much of the work I'm involved in skills is trying to improve those kind of things. We've got skills that are, only placed, are out of kilter with what they should be. In the UK in 2015, only 40% of workers were in jobs that they're not qualified for. So that might be overqualified or underqualified, but not suited. So there's something wrong in the way we're delivering skills relative to the skills that are required. But the really important thing to think about, this is a big statistic to think about, that if you're a business leader, 80% of the workforce of 2030, all right, that's 8 years from now. So 80% of that workforce are already in the workforce. So this is not relying on a load of new people who are going to come in and change everything. This is saying, if you don't get your workforce skilled up, or the people that join you or hire the people or whatever, there isn't a massive other pool that's going to appear. Even with graduates and others coming through, most of the workforce for 2030 is already in the workforce. And so we need to address their skills. And we've got in the UK, just to pick up the leadership thing, 12 out of 19 in workplace practices linked to performance. In other words, we're not at the top of handling workforce performance in the best way, optimizing that, and so on. And of course, when you talk to particularly smaller companies, a lot of them say, well, I don't need to train my staff, or I don't think it's important. 41% said it's not important enough. 39% said it was too expensive. Again, this is a real challenge, and it's a challenge for all of us if we don't get this. We were often told at Cisco that the absorptive capacity of our customers would be limited by the skills in our customers. If your customers can't absorb your technology, then you're limited in your growth. And that's a real challenge, not just for technology companies, but for all companies, particularly if 90% of jobs are going to require digital skills. And there's a relatively small amount being spent by government on this at the moment, but it is directly linked to absorptive capacity, so the ability to take stuff on board. So I guess my call to action really is we need to change. Get involved in your country, your organization, be the business, have a look at bethebusiness.com, start to see whether there are some things you could use in there, understand the opportunity for technology, both in your company and in the companies you're involved with. Improve your skills. I mean, it's one of those things where people who are in the technology industry, which I'm sure many of you are, think, yeah, we're all kind of skilled up, aren't we? But it's incredible, the statistics of people who are not skilled up. And I'm involved also with an organization called Future.now, which is trying to improve the essential digital skills. There are 17.3 million working people in the UK who don't have the essential digital skills for work. That's just horrible. And, you know, I think that we need to find a way of improving that. And I think, you know, companies and others have a responsibility to try and improve the statistic, let alone, you know, the adults who in normal life can't engage with that. So that was all I really wanted to say at this point. Don't want to depress you, but I want to see that there is a huge opportunity to go back to that 162 billion of gross value added we can improve. Thinking about technology adoption is important. Thinking about the things you can do if you adopt technology, thinking about the way your technology is represented, thinking about the way that you, your supply chain, your customers, your partners, and of course your employees, if you're an organization, actually adopt technology is super important. So hopefully that's made you think a little bit, maybe set you up a little for some of the discussions we're going to have a bit later. And I will now, I'll stop sharing, and I think there'll be an opportunity for anybody who might want to ask a question. Oh, you've already stopped sharing, so there you go.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Phil. That was extremely insightful. We do have a couple of follow-up questions if you're open to them right now.
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
So if you, like Germany, basically a country or a company are already productive, do we still need to think about how we can keep working at it, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. No, you're right. It's a very good question. You know, if you're Germany, do you really need to do anything? Well, of course you do, because when you look at the sort of stats we created in there, yes, we are, you know, 60% of 70% of people who work in companies who are less than productive. The number in Germany is somewhere in the high 50s. So yes, they're better than the UK, but they're still got some challenges. Now, you know, some countries are better. You know, I was given a similar pitch to this a couple of years ago in Singapore, and I stood up behind the Singapore Minister for Economy, and he basically said, you know, we've got this, every company's got to train their people to be more productive. We're going to have technology adoption. There's going to be money given to every company to help with technology adoption. So some countries are getting their act together, but there's still a long way to go. And I think any of us who are involved in technology know, because you see it in your day-to-day life, don't you? You go into organizations. There's a little organization near me, you know, that sells farm stuff, you know, like, you know, compost and oil and all that sort of stuff. And you go into there, and it's a great little company, and he employs a few people, but you walk in and it's an office with this like desks piled up to here with papers. And, you know, and I genuinely thinking, and when you ask them for your invoice, you know, they go through all these invoices and they pull it out and they hand it to you, and you think, you know, that could be better. But how do I persuade that particular guy that it's a good idea to change? You know, and it may be that in his business, lifestyle business, he's doing just okay. But when someone, what we say often in Be The Business is, it's people like me doing things like I do, persuade them. So if the guy down the road who happens to be selling similar stuff is more productive, you know, takes more holidays, has more staff, attracts more people, then he starts thinking, oh, interesting, why am I not doing that? And I think we've not really addressed that properly yet. I think there's a lot of peer groups and organizations that can genuinely say, you know, could we get better? And I think all of us in our day-to-day life see the organizations that can improve. We need to find the vehicles to help them improve.
Awesome. And just piggybacking off of that, do we know offhand what the key reasons are as to why Germany is more productive?
Well, you know, it's a very interesting dynamic, actually. And it's one of those things, you know, when I ran Cisco in the UK and Ireland, we used to be very proud of the fact that we had a very dynamic, you know, workforce in the UK. It was, you know, very much like the US workforce, kind of hire and fire, you know, much more liberal kind of employment law, because you can employ people and so on. You know, in Germany and France and Italy and so on, you know, once people are on board, it's very, very difficult to structure organizations for all the reasons that they have. You know, so if you've got a regulated 35-hour working week, for example, well, you know, if you're a manufacturing company in Germany, you have to automate. If you want to do stuff, you've got to automate. Whereas in the UK, what we might have done is gone and hired a bunch of low-cost labour because we could. So some markets have basically hamstrung themselves by having some flexibility in other areas and not in the areas that they could invest for the long term. That's not the only reason. There are a number of other structural factors, but you know, Germany's clearly been a manufacturing-oriented society for a long time and have continued with, you know, high-value manufacturing at scale. You know, we still have some significant high-value manufacturing capability in the UK and in other economies, but you know, in Germany particularly, I think a combination of their much greater number. If you go to Siemens in Berlin, for example, there are 8,000 apprentices, and all of the board were apprentices. So they've got much more kind of work-oriented, as opposed to, as I said before, you know, a lot of university students in the UK who are working on the till in the supermarket. That's wrong. You know, we shouldn't have that kind of setup. So I think there's been some more systemic things that have been done in other countries, but they all have a journey to go on.
Perfect. And one last follow-up question. I know that we need to kind of get moving here, but do you think organizations find it difficult to visualize their productivity and the things that are affecting it in their business?
Yeah, clearly. And, you know, there's no doubt about it that organizations struggle with the volume of information that's available and their ability to digest it. That's true of big and small organizations. And I know you guys at SharpCloud are very focused on, you know, that particular issue. Of course, it's an issue. I mean, you know, if you're a small business, you've probably got loads and loads of data coming into you, and you know about your employees, and you know about your customer. You do know some about your customers' employees. But actually, you know, if you put in some sophisticated ERP or CRM system, have you really got the capability to digest it all? The answer is probably no. And that's why, as we saw, 53% of organizations struggle to be able to articulate what the ROI is in their organization. And I think being able to see through that, being able to digest what the output really should be, is a very powerful dynamic for any business. And the best businesses, of course, are really good at this. And I think that's what we need to get better at.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Bill. We really appreciate it. And now that we have had a great intro into getting our brains thinking about how we can solve this productivity puzzle, let's go ahead and jump into one of the great examples who's actually doing that right now. So our next speaker is Gregorio. He has 15 years of experience in automation and robotics. And over the past 2 years, he's been transitioned from the aerospace industry into the packing industry. And during the first year, Gregorio has been studying all of the current technological states and how we can automate and start digitizing some of the new strategies. And in doing that, he is using SharpCloud as a dynamic piece in doing that. So I'm going to pass it over to Gregorio to go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Number one, thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I think this is going to be a fun one. I really, you know, what I want to do today is really talk to you about my story, talk to you about, you know, why am I utilizing SharpCloud? How is it helping me? And, you know, and where do I see it fit in my role? You know, I'm really focused on the technology side. I think Phil did a fantastic job at covering some of the barriers that we face in manufacturing and how we have to change. We have to be able to adapt new technology to be able to, you know, change the way we produce our products and how we manufacture our products. And we also have to upskill our people to be able to address that. So in my previous role, I was in the research and technology sector. Our goal was to always try to come up with the latest, you know, research the latest technology, figure out how to bring it into the manufacturing workforce, and then be able to adopt it and see what the impacts would have in our manufacturing workspace. But I think what I want to do is kind of tell you, you know, where does my story begin? Where did I start with SharpCloud and why? And so, you know, this brings me back roughly 4 years ago. In the research and technology sector, we were always challenged on developing roadmaps, developing ideas of what we're going to do in the next 3 years and 5 years. Where do we see, you know, technology changing, and how do we see us being able to adapt that technology to essentially make our company better? Where we struggled is we use several tools. I won't mention every single tool, but we use the typical Excel, PowerPoints, and we were trying to create these roadmaps that allowed us to understand our current landscape, and then be able to tell us, where do we feel these initiatives and technologies are allowing us to go, and then how do we think we can align these to our projects of what we need to invest on today. And one of the things that we struggled is, every single year we would spend, roughly a month or so with leaders across the different organizations, different groups, and we will go through this routine of, collecting all this data, bringing this data into our PowerPoint or traditional tools, and then be able to display them. But after a year of developing, we realized that that data was no longer relevant. And in order for us to maintain, sustain that data and to be able to properly communicate it and create those visuals to then not only persuade, and I wrote something down that Phil said, it's not about persuading people, it's about getting people to realize what we're actually working on and what type of impacts we're going to have. And so I started using SharpCloud. I was introduced into SharpCloud 4 years ago, and it became a game changer. And where I really want to focus this topic of discussion is kind of what it's done for me in this new role, where I'm coming from the aerospace industry. A year and a half ago, I joined Amcor. Amcor is it's a global leader in developing and producing responsible packaging for food, beverage, pharmaceutical, medical, and home and personal care. That is completely opposite of aerospace. And so for me to come into this new role as a director of automation, which eventually morphed into now advanced manufacturing, is, how do I even get started? You join this new company as a new industry, new people, new initiatives. We have roughly 225 sites globally, 46,000 employees across the globe. We're stretched out to over 40 countries. So how do I get started? How do I understand what are the difficulties with Amcor? What are the barriers that they're hitting? And then how do I morph my experience of introducing technology and be able to set a strategy for our success? And so that is what I'm going to share with you today. And I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Can you guys see my screen, by the way? Hopefully it's sharing.
I cannot see it yet.
Okay, there we go.
There we go.
So when it comes to SharpCloud, there's a friend of mine that introduced me to what they call the drip issue, which is data rich, information poor. We live in the technology world. There's plenty of data out there. There's plenty of initiatives going on. There's a magnitude of vendors that can introduce these technologies and everybody promises you the world. Everybody tells you they can help you. But how do we map it together? How do we address the questions? And so when I first started, I wanted to, what you're seeing here is essentially, within North America, my role is the director of advanced manufacturing within North America for Flexibles here at Amcor. And so what you're seeing here, I had 37 plans that I needed to understand what is going on, what are the barriers. Roughly we had, 80 something, 50 something projects out there that I needed to fully understand and how they're aligned together and how they are associated together. We have different, at least 5 different business units also working on these projects or trying to introduce new initiatives and new technology, different focus areas. And so how do I structure this? How do I bring this together? And SharpCloud for me has been a great tool for me to formalize, structure, and then create the visuals that I need for me to be able to map things out. So as I started using this tool, what I was able to do is then organize it into different focus areas where I know now how to focus my attention and where do I feel that we are going to be successful at. So within the organization, and of course here within the SharpCloud, I did I did create something that's very similar to what we're using. But of course, I can't share that today with you. So I just created something that kind of represents and is very similar to kind of how we align things here together. But within my advanced manufacturing team, we needed to create initiatives. And let me back up here for a little bit. Before creating initiatives, the first thing we ask ourselves is, what questions do we really want to answer? What is the problem here? And I wrote a couple of questions while Phil was speaking, because it really motivated me on the adoption of technology. And one of the things that I commonly hear leaders within manufacturing asking is, first of all, what is it that we're working on? What new capabilities are we trying to chase? How are those new capabilities are going to benefit us as a company? What are all the different type of vendors that are out there? What groups are working on what, and how do we create these alignments? And then how are those aligned to our overall organization strategic objectives and goals? And as I started working with SharpCloud with this tool allowed us to really understand and filter this data. So the data that you saw today was a really unorganized data. Here it is. So once I started working on what, the projects, the plans, where, the business units, then we started creating structures, which allowed us to look at this data a little bit different, allowed us to have different visuals. Then after that, we started to then create these strategic objectives. And so basically from there, we were able to say, within our advanced manufacturing group, we have now sub-initiatives that address certain focus areas to then address our strategic objectives. So once we were able to grab this data and formalize it, are now then able to see how we can align our projects and then also align our investments. So from there, we were able to now create our dashboards that allowed us to see not only what's going on today, but what is the needs and ask of every single one of these plants, and how do we feel like we need to be able to invest in the future. So if I organize my data based on our business units, and I organize my data based on all the project demand of all the technology that's being asked for in the plants, and start asking what is it going to do for us, we can easily create these visuals where we can see where the investments are going, which focus areas are getting more attention than others, which projects are, which projects are contributing to that specific focus area. We're also able to communicate every single project that we have in our capital plan, and basically, what's the investment? What is the investment? What is the projected savings? And then where we are with our technology. So here we're able to easily create these visuals without having to manipulate any PowerPoints or any Excel sheets. For us, SharpCloud has really allowed us to create this, visuals from the same exact data, which to me has saved us a lot of time, which then accelerates, it keeps my team focused on executing, then being able to create, pretty visuals, right? But and we are also able to organize this data based on business units. So now I can talk to every single one of these business unit leaders, tell them roughly how much we're going to be investing in year 3 or 4 years, and then which projects contribute to that investment, and do we really need to chase those projects, and in what order. And then from that, it also allows, this tool has allowed me to create visuals, not just for me, but for my leadership team as well, to be able to map out, when do we think these investments are going to hit, and when do we think those returns are going to hit. So then we can create this nice visual for us to understand what's happening here, not only for this year, what happened last year, but what's going to be happening beyond 2025. And again, associating that with our projects. And something I want to create here is, or want to come across, is all these visuals are not, one of the things that I've noticed is, we get stuck in creating pretty pretty visuals to create, to be able to present and persuade our leaders. But in reality, we're creating visuals for us to realize what we're working on and what is it that we're trying to achieve, and how do we align that to our core alignments or our core objectives. So these are just some examples on how we're able to break down all that data and then be able to create visuals using this tool for us to see, how our financial impacts and investments and returns are mapped out over the next few years. So from this dashboards, a lot of my leaders, and I've been able to share this with my with my leadership team as well, they now have access to this. They can see this. They don't, and if there's any misalignments, they can communicate with me and be able to have those conversations. So that way we create alignment across cross-functional teams. So from there, of course, we can also have different visuals for roadmaps. All those projects, all those investments, how do they look over time? We can narrow it down to specific business units. We can see how projects are related, which ones depend on each other. And then I didn't get into the details, but basically for every single one of these projects, we have all the financial information, we have all the scope information, and we also keep track of the current status of the project and whether or not it's achieving what we thought it was going to achieve. And again, I just want to just show you an example of how I'm utilizing this tool to change how we think in manufacturing and how we adopt new technology to really impact our businesses. So again, just kind of going through a couple examples of projects that are related. I left this one here as an example, as this project project 11 depends on project 45. Why is it that we focused on delivering project number 45, and now project 11 is going to see an impact? And so again, this is just an example on how we're utilizing this tool to see whether or not we're working on the right things and ahead of time instead of reacting. So from here, again, we can look at our roadmap over our business units. We also have the capability to look at it beyond different focus areas. And so here you can see the dependencies between each individual group, and we can create those alignments and then filter it down and seeing whether or not we're achieving our results. So if I go back to this planning knowledge base, this is another way we are utilizing SharpCloud. But basically what we do is we map out all these plants. One of our strategy here is to really get a good understanding of what is it that we're trying to achieve before we go automate. One of the things that I've experienced, being in the automation realm for 15 years, is that automation is really attractive. Sometimes we can have misperceptions of what automation can do. Sometimes there's a misperception of automation is going to solve all our problems. And, my message has always been, not focus on automation, but focus on transformations. And transformations, you need three major things. You need technology, process, and people. And, Phil made a mention to this earlier, but we need to make sure, technology, typically in my experience, has been the easiest thing to implement. But being able to focus on the process and people side is usually the toughest part. And so knowledge base for us means is how much do we really understand the process and the people side before we implement that technology. And from this visual, what it allows us to understand is which plants we are essentially, we have more knowledge of. And as we start getting projects within those plants, we're able to then know that we have a higher certainty that we are going to have success. So in this example, any plant that is on the level zeros for us with lower priorities, there might be 40 projects in that area, but that's not where we're going to focus our attention. We're going to focus our attention on the critical plants that are having issues that our technology can address, and we have the most knowledge of. So that way we can guarantee our success of adapting our technology. Another visual that I wanted to show you guys is also being able to understand our current state, the things that we are executing. Where are they? where do they stand? Now this tool allows me to communicate to each individual business unit and demonstrate, hey, all these projects that you have on your table, we're in the proposal state, we're in the investigation state. Now these are in the execution state. This is what my team is focused on. And now there's no misconception of, what's being worked on and what's not being worked on. We can create these visuals very easily without manipulating any data. It's just changing the way we utilize this tool to be able to show that to not only my customers, but also to my leadership and to my team to create those alignments. But overall, we can create also these visuals for the focus areas. But in the end, for me, the Sharp Cloud, it is a tool, that to me has been very impactful. When I first started, it was in November 2020. I needed to fully understand where the business was going. And I would say utilizing this tool within a couple of months, in 3 months, I was able to analyze our current landscape and create a strategic plan and a roadmap for this company. So for that way, I can grow my team and start executing within record time. I would say in my previous position, it would take us roughly 6 months to 8 months to really get a good understanding and hold of where we were. And utilizing that right tool and partnering up with ShopCloud has allowed us to really develop a strong strategy within 2-month time frame. And use and continue to use this tool to have those communication pipeline to our leadership team to then, and that's going to stick with me, Phil, but not persuading, but making sure they realize what we're working on and where we're heading. And so here at Amcor, it is a tool that we are utilizing and is gaining a lot of ground. And one of the things that I'm really excited is that other functions within our team are starting to leverage this tool. And now we're creating alignment between other functions, not just my team and now what we are working on, but what everybody else is working on within the North American region. But that's all I wanted to share as an example of how we're utilizing SharpCloud to really leverage this for us to do strategic thinking and roadmap development.
Great. Thank you so much, Gregorio. That's a great presentation and a great utilization of the tool. So we do have a number of follow-up questions. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right. So how do you collate the data? Do you enter it directly into SharpCloud? Do you copy and paste it in there? Is there some sort of data format? Do you use something like forms? Is there an API? How do you best do it?
So I'm going to tell you how I utilize it, but when I started here, I started entering data manually. I just start saying, okay, well, I'll copy an Excel sheet that has reference to other plants, and I'll drag and drop it into SharpCloud for me to say, okay, here's this data point. Then I'll collect data from the projects. And SharpCloud does have the capability of being able to copy Excel sheets and put it into SharpCloud. So then I copy that. And then once I have it in the SharpCloud realm, that's when I can start manipulating. That's when I can start creating categories, creating structure, creating creating formatting. That's kind of what I do to get a good understanding of what's out there. But it is very, very helpful to structure your data beforehand, because once you have it structured, then in SharpCloud, it becomes very easy to utilize. And then as far as connecting it, we are currently working with SharpCloud to now start connecting it to our systems. And our IT counterparts are really engaged in utilizing this tool. And so now that we have a process in place, we're going to be automating that. That way we no longer have to create items manually.
I love it. Automating the automating process.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on to the next question. Do you think there's a fourth level to people, process, and technology? Organization, leadership, culture, alignment, teamwork, maybe?
I guess I don't, a level as far as the importance of transformation.
I guess so, or meaning that maybe there's something in there. So you have people, processes, and technology, but is there maybe a fourth level in that that help
You
with
know,
the transformation? Buy-in from the organization.
yeah, I think, you know, if regarding buy-in, for me, it's all about creating the visuals, and I'll go back to the drip method. There's usually a lot of data out there, data rich, information poor. There's a lot of data out there, but it's really hard for us to be able to have those insights of what that data really means. And so for us to be able to map things out and create those visuals, it allows us to understand what is it that we're really doing and what's not, and not only what you're doing, but what is it that works and what is it that doesn't work, right? And then how do we leverage and maximize what is working, and how do we do not stop working on the things that are not working, and communicate that. And it's amazing how fast we lose track of things we did a couple of years ago or even a year ago, and then we repeat the history. But that's why, you know, it's so important for us to not only map out the future, but get a good understanding of our history, and making sure that we know where, you know, where did we start and why is it that we are in the place that we're in today. And when it comes to transformations, you know, you know, what I like to say is, you know, technology, process, people, and I say it in the order of difficulty, with technology being the easiest, process is the second hardest, and the people side is the most difficult thing that you face. And in my career, I spent roughly 7 years of my career fixing failed automation projects that were implemented and now well adopted by the culture and essentially stopped in production. And my job was to revive them and understand where, you know, where were the barriers. And I've had several people ask me, out of those 7 years of reviving failed automation or unused automation, what is it that you learned? What is it that, you know, what is one thing that you saw that that wasn't, that all of them had in common? And I can tell you right now, it wasn't the technology. The technology was pretty much dead on. It's just that nobody focused that the process was correct for that technology, and that the people were trained to utilize that process to then help that technology.
Well, I think that's kind of a common theme between both of our presenters today, is just the people and the processes, and making sure that that is one of the bigger components of being successful. So I know that you talked about time savings with using SharpCloud and just being able to save on productivity. So in helping to save time on mapping out your automation strategy, how is that translated into increased productivity in the plants?
Well, as far as increasing productivity, it's really about being able to bring this technology into fruition and not allowing our projects to go through the churn of indecisions. And what I mean by that is there's a magnitude of asks from the plants. The plants every single plant wants to improve. Every single plant wants the latest technology. Every single plant wants to be more productive. But my communications to them is, let's make sure that we are optimized before we automate or we bring those technologies into your place. But what SharpCloud has done for us is create those alignments. And one thing that I was not able to share, and I did not have a visual, is for every single plant, we have a SharpCloud visual that the plants can see, or what projects that we are working on the technology side, but we have projects that they need to do on the process side. And then we're establishing projects that we need to do on the culture side to train them to utilize our technology and the new processes that are going to be set in place to fully transform their plants across time, not just for today. And so creating those visuals allows us to make sure that we have a true alignment and we can work on those things ahead of time and not react. And if you want to talk about time savings, is when you can have a forecast on what you're going to do, we can make projects happen in the right time, so that way we don't create delays where things can slide to the right, which is very, very typical, especially when you're focused on transformations and not automation.
Awesome. So just going back on the productivity aspect and everything. So do you think the level of control and visualization you have achieved makes you more productive and successful in your own market?
Absolutely. I spent less time now trying to develop visuals. I would say in my role, I would have my team help me create visuals for once a month, once a week, for us to be able to update where we are today. But having this tool here has made it much easier for us. So that way we're not focusing on creating visuals, we're focusing on execution and strategy development.
And just for giggles, what were you doing previously before SharpCloud as far as creating those visuals? Take us through that process.
Do I really have to? Yes, it was the typical, we will compile. It was the master of all the projects we had. Very hard to read, very hard to maintain, very hard to sustain. We will utilize, of course, PowerPoint. PowerPoint has its place as well. And we will update little triangles and slide them in time frame. And you can imagine the time that consumed us for us to do that, especially my team and myself. Not only do you have to create it, you have to review it, and then after you review it, you have to release it. And then 2 months later, guess what? It's not true anymore. So you go through the churn of doing that. We used, many Microsoft projects. We tried many methods, and all of them were really hard to maintain, sustain. And I think for us, you utilizing SharpCloud, and and it's going to be more to come, is when we started creating this architecture where data can be streamlined, and we don't have to enter things manually, only when we have to. And I think the support that you guys have provided us has been fantastic, and not only guiding us, not only doing what we're saying, but also guiding us on how to best utilize this tool.
Perfect. I know one of our resident experts we were talking about earlier, he's always like, well, there's a better way to do that. Well, we'll hear from him in just a moment. But last question, does the business acknowledge that your approach and use of SharpCloud has given them unique insights and profitability?
Yes, to the point that other groups are now expanding, and they're starting to utilize this tool to see how they're getting benefit out of it as well. But what I'm most interested in is being able to create the alignment between my initiatives and their initiatives, because in the end, we have to work as a one unit for us to be successful. And what I've realized in my position working on the technology realm is we can have we have multiple groups working on different initiatives, and sometimes something that I will create can be overridden by another system in another group. So I think as more of my teammates start utilizing this tool, we can really have those visuals for us to be able to see whether or not we're going to trip over each other, and create those alignments so we can achieve our strategic objectives.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for taking us through your use and how you are elevating your role and also just your business processes by using SharpCloud. Going along with that kind of theme of visualization, Duncan is actually going to come in and show you exactly how to visualize your data using a different way, using the new technology Radar. And he is one of our resident product experts and just very knowledgeable in the space. He actually was the driving force. He and some clients were the driving force behind creating this new technology Radar. So looking forward to seeing what he has to present. Duncan, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Liza. So great stuff from Phil and Gregorio. Really always appreciate seeing how SharkCloud's put into practice in these organizations, and hearing the feedback like that is always really really nice to see. But like Liza mentioned, I'll be walking you guys through some of the new functionality that SharkCloud has been putting out, specifically in this manufacturing technology development space. I've been working with some of our customers, gathering feedback, and we've been able to put together this new radar view. So I'll walk you through an example of how that could be used and is being used in some of our customer stories. And definitely want to hear feedback from you, and you can always reach out if you have any questions on this. But let me go ahead and share my screen, and we will jump right into it. So I'll set the stage for some of the things that we're going to be looking at here first. So this is a manufacturing roadmap, just an example roadmap, but I want to start by taking a look at our entire strategic landscape so that we know kind of how this radar fits into the overall piece of this puzzle. So here I'm looking at kind of the 8 strategic goals that this organization has outlined for us to be working towards. Now what I can start to do is start to include other elements of this roadmap that I want to visualize and see how that impacts this strategy and these goals that we've outlined. So things like the manufacturing process elements that we could be looking to automate or innovate around or improve, we can include those. The specific technologies that we're working on to support some of those automation, the partners that we could be leveraging in different industries, to help us develop these technologies or innovate or understand these processes a little bit better, and then the risks that we identified here as well. So of course, this is just, it's typical SharkCloud view. You can see all of this in one place, but the real power comes from being able to see how all of this is connected, as Gregorio outlined really nicely. So for this example, let's say that we are looking to innovate around one of these process elements that we've outlined here. We'll take optimize our equipment effectiveness as the strategy that we're looking to execute on. What I can do is I can select this item and I can filter on it. And I'll show that here in the view really quickly. And now I can know exactly which of the goals that we've outlined as an organization this strategy will help me execute on. Which of the technologies do we need to develop, and exactly how much total investment needs to go into each of these technologies as well. And then lastly, what are the partners that we could need to leverage, or the risks that we need to take into account when making these types of decisions. So in this case, if we are looking to execute on this particular strategy, I can see that there's one partner, Global Aerosystems, that has a connection to 2 of the 5 technologies that are needed in order to help us optimize our equipment effectiveness. And that's Global Systems Incorporated here, and they have a connection to this additive manufacturing technology and the digital twin technology that we've identified. So what I can do now is I can take this insight that I've gathered by filtering on these relationships and selecting on the strategy that I want to execute on and might need to make decisions around, and I can take that information and go to a different SharkCloud view. And I'm going to use this new radar that we've developed to help me understand this question that I have in a little bit more detail. So a little bit of background about this view. This is obviously a circular technology radar here. So these segments, in this case, indicate the different types of technologies that we were looking at on that previous page. And the dots that we can see here with these little halos or borders around them are the specific technologies. So in this case, I can see exactly the status of these technologies in these different process or different technology types that I've identified. And I can see these individual rings represent the different time horizons which we're looking to develop these technologies in. So short-term, medium, long-term, and then of course I've segmented out these technologies. Now there are a number of ways that you could set up this radar, and I've set up a quick view to just walk through a couple of them here. You can control the text sizing and whether or not that's shown. You can obviously control what's shown in these different segments if you want to have the status like we were talking about, or the technology types, or really whatever data point or attribute you have in your SharkCloud story. You can incorporate that into the radar in different ways. You can also control exactly what's shown in these individual rings. So whether or not they represent time horizon like we were looking at on these 2 here and in the last example, or they represent the different technology readiness levels for your technology. And then lastly, we couldn't develop a radar in good faith without giving it actual radar spinning functionality. So for those who do want to style up their radars a little bit, you do have that option as well. But let's jump back to this radar that's particularly important to the discussion that we're having in this scenario. So what I'm looking at here is all the technologies, like I mentioned, and I can see the status around the borders as well. But one thing you'll notice at the bottom of the screen here is that I've included some filters, so I can slice and dice this radar in different ways. Now, one thing that's really cool about this relationships that we were looking at on the previous screen is they're actually more than just lines between boxes on that screen. They're data points that we can use in different ways. So I can actually filter this radar by the things that are related to that strategy that I identified. So if I want to see what does this radar look like in terms of optimizing our equipment's effectiveness, I can easily filter that radar and see exactly for those 5 technologies that we identified, how are those coming along? And I can actually see that one of those is part of our longer term strategies, digital twin, that we identified as one of the 2 that was connected to that partner. So if I'm looking to execute on that strategy in the short term, maybe this is something that I need to have a discussion around or make a decision to try and accelerate the development of this technology a little bit quicker. And of course, I can now take this information and jump to another view like a timeline view. So I can see exactly what time frames or what are the dates that I can expect that technology that I'm concerned with to be available for me to use. So in this case, I'm looking at those same sets of technologies, but in a little bit of a different context. I can see the technology type here, but I can see now the exact starts and end dates across the bottom here. And one thing you also notice is I included those partner organizations up in what we call the tray. So I can still visualize those relationships between the items on my timeline and some of those higher level influences like our partners. So in this case, I might want to filter on that partner that I identified, the Global Systems Incorporated. And in this case, I can see that they have a connection to a number of the technologies that we're actively developing right now, additive manufacturing being one of them. But I can see that this digital twin is pushed out a couple of years. So again, I'll need to make a decision. Maybe I want to accelerate this a little bit and push out another technology that might not be as important to this plan that we identified that we're trying to execute on so that we can utilize this partner's time in the most effective way while still being able to achieve what we're hoping to. So this is just one example of how this technology radar view can fit into a lot of the stories that are being used in the space and that our customers are using. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or another member of the SharkCloud team. And we can work with you on getting you access to this as well. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. But for now, I'll pass it back to Liza.
Perfect. Thank you, Duncan. We really appreciate that showcase. So we do have a couple of questions if everyone who presented today wants to hop back on camera. And so I think that Phil may have had to run to another board meeting. We saw how many boards he's a member of, so I totally understand that. But Gregorio and Duncan, if you can just hang around for a minute and then let's see if we can answer some of these questions. All right, so this is more tactical, but in SharkCloud, where's the best place to start when creating your roadmap? The layers or grid view, or do you go directly to a timeline? Kind of what's the best practice there?
So, I mean, I wouldn't say there's necessarily a best way to get started. It really depends on the question that you're trying to answer. A lot of times I see people use that layer view because it allows you an easy way to see everything that you have going on across your organization or in your landscape, and then be able to create those relationships between some of those items that you need to see how everything's interconnected. But some people are really concerned with the timeline, and that's a really important piece in making the decisions as to kind of what they need to develop, kind of like Gregorio was mentioning. So, I mean, Gregorio, why don't you jump in here? How did you get started when you were building your stories?
Well, I got 2 answers on that one. As far as my initiative and creating those timelines, it's all about creating those alignments and understanding the priorities for those projects and roughly how long they take, and then start mapping it out in a roadmap and seeing whether or not we are consuming more than what we can achieve, which sometimes happens, and then be able to move things within that same timeline so that way we can see whether or not we can actually perform the work. But the other one that I wanted to mention is, as I work with every plant, I'm creating these transformational transformational roadmaps for every single one of these plans. And the way I like to start is the known facts, the known projects. What is it that they're working on today? Map the current landscape today, put it into ShopCloud, and then seeing how, and then from there, I can grab how my projects can map out with their current state. Because I like to know when, certain machines are being installed or certain processes are going to change. And then once we map out our projects, which is on the automation side and the technology side, we can see whether or not we're committed to a time frame that it's going to not work well for that plant because the resources are going to be consumed with other projects that they have. So it's all about creating those alignments. So when it comes to plant-based, I usually like to map out what the known facts. Start with the facts, start with the projects that are solid, put those on the map. And then after that, we can put the future into it.
Perfect, thank you. And Gregorio, I think this next question is definitely one more for you. But so one of the common themes is people, the buy-in of technology adoption and everything. So one of the biggest challenges that this person finds is the lack of leadership when trying to make changes. That involves technology and adoption of technology. What have you seen in your career as some ways to address that situation?
Oh man, people definitely, and I just want to clarify what I mean by people. Understanding the culture of where you implement a technology is very, very key. Not only on kind of how they're working, but also what's their history. How are they used to performing their, or what are the common things that they do on a daily basis? And when we introduce a technology, we need to identify how different that is, right? But when it comes to getting leadership involved, I'm gonna say it, and it sounds really biased, but creating the visuals for leaders to know what we're working on. What is it that we're working on, and how, and what are the gaps? And when we identify gaps on the technology, on the cultural side, we call it the people is on the culture, is then we then break it down. Is it based on lack of training or lack of skill sets? Or maybe it's the wrong skill sets in the wrong positions. And by creating that visual and those alignments, it allows our leaders to be in touch of what's going on and what are the barriers for them to get involved and start causing that change.
Perfect, thank you. So I think that draws today's session to a conclusion. If anyone has any further questions, we are always open to further discussions. You can see this QR code on the screen in front of you. So just scan that QR code and it will take you to a place where you can ask those questions. We definitely want to stay in touch with everyone and make sure that every question is answered. So we also on that are always looking for feedback on how this session has gone. Definitely learn our best from you guys and how you help us to best improve so that we can help you. So help us help you. We really appreciate it. So again, a QR code to a brief survey should be less than 2 minutes, but how we can help enhance these situations. A huge thank you to Gregorio and Phil and everyone else who helped us present today. We hope that you've gotten some great insight on the future of productivity and in manufacturing and digitalization. So thanks so much for joining us today, and be on the lookout for a recording at the end. Have a great day.